When you start with yes, amazing things happen. Amazing things happen when you start with yes. And we are taught that, and it is instilled in us in West Neal's Roger Bacon High School marching band. And with that, I say good evening. It's good to see everyone. My name is Joe Inderhees, and it says here on my very detailed outline that I got from Joe Fowler. I knew that would be funny for people. I don't know why, I just knew that would get a chuckle. That I should maybe explain why it is that somebody who was in the Roger Bacon marching band class of 1995 is emceeing an event for the 25th anniversary of a trip that he did not take. I'd like to thank you, Brian. There are a couple of reasons. And as with everything with me, there's a short answer and there's a long answer. And lucky for you guys, you're going to get both. The short answer is Brian Neal is my best friend, and I learned loyalty here. And so when your best friend asks you to do something, you say yes. And by the way, in the 30 plus years of friendship, he's asked me to do 3 things. Stand with him when he married Amy, be godfather to his youngest son, and this. That should tell you something about how important each of you are to him. The other story, the longer story, provides maybe a little more context as to why it's so important for me to be here tonight. And it starts about my junior year when there was a silent auction. And one of the items that was up for bid was a performance of the band. That you could have the band come play at a time and place of your choosing. And my mom bid on the item and won the item. And she decided to have the band come play at our house for my grandma's birthday. My grandma was living with us as she was undergoing treatment for cancer. It's one thing to be in the band and be playing Louie Louie and watching people dance. It's another thing to have the band play for you and to watch someone who you love experience that level of joy. And that's what you do. That's what you did. You brought joy to her. And then a couple years later, when cancer did what cancer does, we were at the funeral mass. And during communion, this long line of young people was walking up to the altar. And my cousin looked at my mom, who was a teacher, and said, "Aunt Judy, are these your students?" And my mom said, "No, that's the Roger Bacon Marching Band. That's the rest of Joe's family." That's why I'm here tonight. Thank you all. I'm also here tonight because I'm one of the 1,000 or so people who are part of the legacy of the Roger Bacon Marching Band. You all went to Russia because I went to Florida. I went to Florida because Amy went to Traverse City. Amy went to Traverse City because John Powers went to Florida. They did much better than we did. And we all did all of those things because we had spit valves freezing at the Delhi Christmas Parade, and because we played 3 parades on the 4th of July before standing out for the St. Bernard fireworks, and we got invited to play the Tall Stacks with Eric Kunsel and the Cincinnati Pops. I am here because when you are part of that legacy, you have earned the privilege to say, we. And so on behalf of the 1,000 who came before you, allow me to say how proud we are of all of you, and to say thank you for representing us in such a beautiful and powerful way. And so with that, we're going to begin our program. You're going to hear fantastic stories from a student perspective, from the parent perspective, and of course, from the man himself, the boss. Couple of administrative items. When we finish the program, don't just run out to your cars. We're going to take 2 pictures. Very important. We're going to take 2 pictures. Don't just run away. I'll go through some of the other administrative items throughout the course of the evening. The most important one is the bar will remain open throughout the program. And now I'd like to welcome up to the stage Mr. Joe Fowler. Welcome, Joe.
We arrived at our hotel midday and had a bus tour of the city. And the first afternoon, we were in Moscow. Having settled in after a brief period of time before we were going to go out and tour the town, Kevin Egar, Lorraine Witt, and I walked out of the hotel across the plaza to a market just to kind of see what was out there. After walking past a few booths, a vendor approached and pointed at my hat. If you recall, for safety, we all had white baseball caps with a red bill that said Cincinnati Millicron in block letters. That way we could all see each other in the crowd and we could find each other and be safe in a foreign country. And those came from Millicron, obviously, because Mr. Jeff Lampy, that's where he worked, and he got them donated. They were not the most fashionable hats ever. So after a few booths, a vendor sees me and he takes my hat, and he turns and ignores me the rest of the conversation, the transaction, and he starts negotiating with Lorraine, who was standing next to me. So a few minutes later, we'd exchanged the Cincinnati Millicron ball cap and a few dollars, not rubles, maybe 5 or 10, for a Yushanka, the traditional Russian hat, the big furry ones with the ear flaps that come down and on the top sometimes. So not quite sure exactly what happened. We walked back to the hotel where people were starting to gather in the lobby for the bus tour, and we got lots of expressions of surprise for 2 reasons. We had a few rules in the band in those days, and the rule was we were given these hats, it was part of the uniform, you had to wear them on the trip, like it or not, so we could find each other. And then the other reason, regarding cash, before we took the trip, people withdrew however much cash they were going to take. There weren't ATMs really in that time, certainly not in Russia. You didn't really use credit cards overseas. And so the cash you had was the cash you had for the trip. So some people were aghast that we must have blown a good chunk of our money on this fancy hat a few hours after arriving, and we wouldn't have enough money for food later in the trip. And then others thought, oh man, you're going to be in trouble because you're going to be out of uniform day 1. But with a little explaining, people eventually figured out that the vendor thought the Millicron hats were a soccer team. And he thought it was really valuable and was really excited for it. So we did not shed a tear giving up those hats in exchange for this iconic Russian winter hat. And so once people realized that, the game was on for bartering those hats for all sorts of goods and souvenirs over in Russia the rest of the trip. So that's the story of how the first trip was traded for, or the first hat was traded for a Russian souvenir. And I don't think any of the Millicron hats came back to the US. I think they all got traded for something. So when we think of iconic people, organizations, or events, we sometimes think they were always triumphant. But until they achieved that fame, their success was not preordained, and neither was the success of our trip. After being invited, the organizers attended our spring concert in '97, which was held over at Xavier University in their auditorium. And it wasn't really our sharpest performance overall, so they might have had doubts selecting us. And a year later, when we sat down next to the Russian musicians, we were probably somewhat intimidated, because while many of us started playing our instruments in high school, they had trained, the group we were with, they trained for many years from a young age on their instrument, and they were working towards becoming professionals. So it was like us, sitting alongside folks who would go to Juilliard or something of that caliber. And not only were they very good musicians, but it was their home turf, right? We traveled a long way. It was a familiar environment to them, but the environment was new to us, and it was a foreign land. So things may not have worked out for our trip for a number of reasons. But when we performed in Gorky Park on Saturday morning, May 9th, we could have retired right there. We'd done what we set out to do. We traveled from around the world and played in Moscow. People crowded around us and watched from above on the bridge that overpassed right near the park as we were warming up. Gorky Park is a well-known park, kind of like Central Park or the Boston Common or Coney Island. And so we not only carried the US flag that day, but we also carried the flag of the state of Ohio on the stage. And as good as that performance was, almost no one would rank it in the top 3 performances of the trip, because it wasn't even the top 3 performances that day. And our next stop that day on Saturday the 9th was at Red Square, which is bounded by the Kremlin on one side and the iconic St. Basil's Cathedral on another. Most years on the morning of May 9th, which is known as Victory Day in Russia, which marks the end of World War II in Europe, celebrating when the Russians defeated the Nazi Germany invasion, a military parade is held on Red Square, which is reviewed by the Russian president. And in fact, 3 years earlier, President Clinton and all the major world leaders were there to mark the 50th anniversary of the end of the war in '95. So for our afternoon performance on Red Square, we were in the center, directly opposite Lenin's tomb, as we became the first group to play the Stars and Stripes Forever and This Is My Country on Red Square. The Russian people commented that not only was our music different, they were accustomed to seeing bands wearing formal military uniforms, whereas our dress uniforms are very unique to them. And the parents didn't necessarily get a lot of great photos of that performance because the crowd was 6 and 7 deep most of the way circled around us. So in some cases, all they could do was hold up their cameras and try to take the best photos they can. And some said it was like the Beatles, being the Beatles that day. A half dozen other military bands from around the country were on Red Square performing, and later on in the performance, they'd spread out and they moved themselves so they were on either side of us, and then all of the bands together played a number of Russian songs all together. In the evening, we performed a full-length concert alongside the Moscow Military Music College in the Grand Hall of the Tchaikovsky Conservatory. And a little context regarding the stature of that group in Moscow, the Russian Major General Viktor V. Afseniev, who directed the concert, he performed on national TV the day before for President Boris Yeltsin. Those 3 performances were quite an accomplishment and not bad for the first 48 hours on the ground. And with another 3 performances scheduled for Sunday, the next day, most folks would have been fine to call it a day, but someone wanted us to play for fireworks in the park. And as Joe just mentioned, we've all done the St. Bernard fireworks many times before. We could do that with our eyes closed. So we said, yeah, sure, we'll do it. When we departed that morning from the hotel, we'd been given brown bag lunches to eat. And everyone is familiar or heard the stories of the food we had over there. So at that point in the day, I had a package of cookies, similar to the ones on your table, and 1 warm bottle of Coke in a glass bottle of Coke. After all those 3 performances. So some industrious one or a few parents went to a market and they were able to get a second warm bottle of Coke for us to get us through the fireworks that evening. So off we went to Pogulina Gora Park, where Napoleon camped out when he tried to capture Moscow in 1812. As the bus turned the corner on the main road to drive the length of the park down to the other end where we would perform, we saw out the windows there were 5 lanes of traffic in both directions and 10 cars in those 5 lanes as well too. The huge park was a sea of people, and Brian was sitting next to me, and one of us made the most obvious statement ever that that's a lot of people. He did or I did, I don't remember who. But when we eventually got off the buses and lined up, you eventually got around and lined up in 2s behind the stage, and somebody just said, follow the person in front of you when the drums start playing. And what followed was the most incredible performance ever as a nightcap on an epic day. And also, as Joe mentioned, if you ask what it's like to play in the greatest venues and the biggest stages, frankly, Louie Louie, it's the same 3 chords, whether you're playing it on Red Square, or whether you're playing it at the Harvest Home Parade, or when we played it in this room at pep rallies. But performing for 160,000 people on the hillside in front of us and 300,000 people in the park overall was definitely something else. Electric is obviously a word that comes to mind. But after all of those performances that day, it's remarkable. At the end of that performance, we played Stars and Stripes Forever. And I'm almost speechless that we had anything left in the tank at that point, much less to belt that out at the end as the fireworks were going off behind us and the crowd was going wild. I have many serious memories and fun memories from the trip, as well as everything that it took to get there. Especially the security guards in the hotel walking around with AK-47s was something I'd never seen. Also at the hotel, they had a small kind of cafe gift shop down in one area of it, and it was about night 5 or 6. They had 2 Tony's frozen pizzas in a display case. And I poked my head out, and the next couple of people to walk by, I flagged them down. They were just lucky enough to be there right then and there. And so we split those frozen pizzas, the only 2 they had left in the case. And I'm not sure if I would have made it otherwise, but once I got the pizza, I knew I could survive on 1 bottle of warm Coke the rest of the remaining days to get home. These stories are just some of my memories, and it's a riot to hear everyone else's memories tonight as well, too. But tonight we also have an opportunity to both celebrate and remember. Some of our parents, our lesson teachers, our instrument lesson teachers, and the Roger Bacon teachers, who not only helped us make the trip, but very much made us the people who we have become as adults, have passed away over the years. And many would have loved to have joined us tonight, and would have gotten a kick out of all this. And we appreciate all they did for us. We lost a couple band members who made the trip as well, too. Kevin Goodrum from the class of 2000 was a tuba player. Micah Schindler was a trumpet player from the class of 99. His parents, Mike and Julie, are here tonight, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to reminisce with them. We also have a chance tonight to say thanks. Not only, again, as Joe mentioned, to the many Bacon band members who set the foundation and the standard for us for many years before, but especially to the band senior class of 1997. They missed out on the National Cherry Festival in Traverse City, Michigan. They got rained on at the Festival of States in St. Petersburg, Florida, and they graduated a year before our Russia trip. But we don't get to Russia without them. They were as strong as any other band class we had. We were selected in November of 1996 by the International Fine Arts Institute, the IFAI, from among 80 bands competing in the RCA Dome in Indianapolis. We took 2 adults with us to that competition. Upon arrival at the RCA Dome that morning, Nancy and Rick were off preparing and drilling and warming up the guard and percussion. And so senior John Meyer on the band council went and checked us in for the competition. He tells a funny story of an awkward exchange when he checked in and he went to the organizers and they says, "Who's in charge?" He says he and the other seniors are in charge. And they weren't quite sure what to make of it. No doubt that maturity also made a favorable impression on the IFAI beyond our music and marching. Thanks also to the boosters and the parents who made it happen in ways big and small. As booster president, Mr. Jeff Lampy rightly deserves much credit for his tireless efforts. But so many parents, family members, and friends of the band gave their time and energy at quite a few fundraisers, and in others contributed in countless other ways. Beyond just this trip, parents drove us to lessons, band practices, and performances through the years. When we got the good performance time slot at our first Bands of America competition in the RCA Dome, 6:45 the first year, parents were in the stands, as well as plenty of football games, church festivals, and parades, in the rain and cold, or the heat and humidity. Of course, there's one person in particular who doesn't want the attention. He deflects the credit to the kids who put in the hours and did the work, as well as took care of their academics and each other. He nods to Brian for the phenomenal shows he put together every year. He credits the lesson teachers, the legends such as Mr. Durr, Dr. Diamond, Mr. Brown, among others through the years. To the boosters who always said yes and then made things happen. To the school leadership and faculty for their consistent support. Those are all true statements regarding who gets the credit. It's also true, as Ralph Waldo Emerson said, that our chief want in life is someone who will make us do what we can. Mr. Neal very much was that person for so many of us. He believed in us, pushed us, and got the most from us. There's so much to express and share, but tonight we have the honor to say thank you, Mr. Neal.
Woo!
In September 1998, 4 months after we performed there, the Baltimore Sun newspaper ran an in-depth article about the Tchaikovsky Conservatory, about its rich history, the pride Russians have in it, how selective it is, and how it was falling into disrepair. The article can still be found easily online today. It's described as the greatest and most endangered conservatory in the world. Fortunately, it's still in existence and in use today. A pianist named Denis Matsuev is introduced in the first sentence of that article and is described as a talent that turns up once every 20 years, and when they do, they find their way to the Tchaikovsky Conservatory. These last 25 years, Mr. Matsuev has had a distinguished career, winning piano competitions, performing around the world, receiving awards at the highest order, having a building named after him, and even being a torchbearer at the 2014 Olympics in Sochi. On Friday, February 25th, 2022, he was scheduled to perform in Carnegie Hall in New York City with the Vienna Philharmonic. Yes, that Carnegie Hall, the one musicians are always trying to get to. On Thursday, February 24th, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. His performance was canceled and replaced by a pianist from Germany less than 48 hours before the show. He's been labeled Putin's pianist for his support of the Russian president, which may be genuine or may not really be optional for high-profile personalities in Russia. It leads to a valid question of how to celebrate Russia in these times. Russia has started a war of the bloodiest combat in Europe since World War II, holds journalists and others hostage on phony charges, and threatens the use of nuclear weapons. Should we celebrate making our trip there? Atop the front of the t-shirts each of the band members received for the trip, it said, "To Russia with music." Music was our ticket to get there, but that's not all we brought. We brought our values and shared our culture. The type of trip we took is exactly what was needed to tear down barriers following the end of the Cold War. It helps us to be better citizens of our own country and the world, both today and across these last 25 years. We've been inside the Kremlin and Lenin's tomb. We saw the Russian White House, which was shelled by tanks in a coup less than 5 years before our trip. We've also been in their markets, in their parks, in their McDonald's, and other places where regular people live. We were a part of their May 9th Victory Day celebrations, their most important civic holiday, which is every bit as important to them as the 4th of July is here. Because of our trip, we have a better understanding of the subtleties, the gray areas, the decisions people must make to navigate life. People who saw us perform may get one version of America from the very controlled propaganda that's broadcast within Russia. But those who saw us, who heard us, who interacted with us, hopefully know what our values really are, especially when it doesn't match what they see in the headlines about the U.S. They not only witnessed our can-do spirit in saying yes to every performance they proposed, but also saw that we are people who embody the idea that it isn't giving that we receive. We shared our American culture in our music, jazz, as we performed pieces by George Gershwin 100 years after he was born. Learning to play their music was a sign of respect for their culture. It's stirring that both groups played each other's national anthem together, Mr. Neal directing the Russian national anthem, and Major General Afanassiev directing ours. The answer is a resounding yes. We should celebrate this trip, everything that went into it, and all of the good that has come from it since. We need it more than ever today. Music and these types of cultural exchanges sustained understanding when there is disagreement and conflict at the highest political levels. When this war is eventually over, music and other ties that have endured will be part of bringing people together again and will be part of telling the story. Slavic Farewell and Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture are both examples where art was used to tell the story of war, and undoubtedly music will be used to tell the story of these times in the future. While many can debate policy and next steps, we're in a unique position to speak about the real people we met. Having made our historic trip, we truly know that we're more similar than different. A C, a B flat, a quarter, a half note. These notes on the music staff are the same in every language. So we couldn't carry on much of a spoken conversation with the people sitting right next to us, but we shared the same language of music that we all understood. We prepared on opposite sides of the world and then got one practice together, one day before our epic performances. And not only did we share the culture of our country with the Russians in 1998, we specifically shared the culture truly at the core of the Roger Bacon Band of Spartans for so many years. At the end of the day, the Roger Bacon Band always strove to leave things better than we found them. Sometimes we did that through music, but many times we did so without touching our instruments. We certainly saw the joy on people's faces who listened to us, the pride as we played their traditional music on Red Square, and the enthusiastic clapping during our performance in the Great Hall of the Tchaikovsky Conservatory. Other times in our trip, people were touched by getting to meet and interact with us, by getting to know us or get our autographs. We were fortunate that not only did we leave others better off, but that we are also better off for having made this incredible trip. Later in 1998, for our field competition show that fall, we performed music from the Oscar-winning Broadway musical, Fiddler on the Roof. We can borrow an expression from our friend Tevye as we both celebrate the awesome accomplishments of our trip and stand in awe of those accomplishments and say, to life. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. I couldn't help but notice the saying behind Joe as he was speaking. It's one of the first Latin phrases that you learned here back in my day, and Amy's day, and Brian's day, from Mr. Lamb. That was a tough class, wasn't it? But before you walked into Mr. Lamb's Latin class, you learned mens sana in corpore sano, a sound mind and a sound body. And I couldn't help but think of just how sound your minds were and how prepared your bodies were for what you were to endure. Those are fantastic stories. And it's funny that you mentioned music being the universal language. As we speak, they're holding Eurovision 2023, which is the largest international music contest in the world every year. And you think about all of the things that separate us, but music has that unique quality. And as the father of a 4-year-old, you can see it from when they start, from when we start. Before Hallie learned to read or write, she's learned to sing and dance. If I hear Party in the USA one more time, I think I might stab myself in the ear with a pencil. But by goodness, does she love music. It's as natural as the sun coming up in the east. You heard Joe talk about yes. I hope you heard it. I hope you heard yes. All of those times we said yes to this, we said yes to that, we said yes to this, we said yes to that. It all doesn't happen. If when Mr. Neal calls up Jeff Lampe to say, so here's the deal. We could maybe go to Russia, but it's going to cost a little bit of money. And I think Mr. Neal probably was like, please say no. Please say no. Get Father Roger and I off the hook. Please say no. But instead he said, yes. Instead he said, yes. Let's welcome Jeff Lampe to the stage.
Oh, mine's going to be so boring after all of that. So, I was the booster president at the time, and I have to make sure I start on the right page here. This is the last page. So I want to thank the reunion committee for allowing me to highlight the Moscow experience from the band parent's perspective. This was a journey down a path none of us have taken before and was successful due to the coordinated efforts of committed parents, band members, band staff, and the IFAI and all of our donors. I will outline 4 areas of the journey to get to Moscow. Who invited the band and why? Logistics, venue planning, and fundraising. So who and why? The band was invited by the International Fine Arts Institute, the IFAI, and the Russian Ministry of Culture for a cultural exchange. Who is the IFAI? It's a nonprofit organization who partnered with many ministries of culture across many countries, including Russia, and sponsored young musical groups in a cultural exchanges to build bridges with music. Roberta Gordon and George Gordon were the founders and the facilitators of the exchange, and we're confident the Bacon Band, we've already heard this before, the Bacon Band would be an excellent group for an exchange because of their musical ability, their well-disciplined behavior, as observed at the Bands of America contest, November 7th, 1996 in Indianapolis. Now this is an arguing point between Wes and I, but Roberta Gordon, this is my story, Roberta Gordon called Mr. Neal the Friday after the BOA competition and proposed a cultural exchange venue for the 1998 May Day Victory Day celebration in Moscow, Russia. May Day and Victory Day is May 9th, and it is a big deal in Russia. It celebrates the end of World War II, and it's also the national labor holiday. The cultural exchange terms were the band would go to Russia, hosted by the Russian Ministry of Culture, and the Red Army Cadet Band, directed by General Avanasiev, I think is how it's pronounced, to perform together for a week-long celebration. The following year, the Russian Youth Choir from the St. Petersburg, Russia, would be hosted by the Bacon Band and their parents to perform in Cincinnati and experience the American culture. Mr. Neal told me about this invitation and to discuss it with the booster board. I was the booster president at the time, and he commented, "It's an honor to be invited." But understandably, he had concerns. After all, airfare and the hotel cost alone were $2,000 each, and it was Russia. Tradition of the Bacon Band boosters was trip cost, actually the whole funding of the band, trip costs were paid by the combined efforts of booster fundraising and the band with their paid performances. The total estimated cost, $250,000. The booster response was, "This sounds impossible." Many parents were concerned about the safety of their kids and how they might be treated in Russia, let alone the cost and the time it was required to raise that kind of money. We had no experience with international travel and what was required, flying 100 high school students and 50 band parents to a foreign country, and had only 3 major fundraisers lined up for funding the trip. Somehow, through the grace of God, we convinced the parents, school administration, and other doubters this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and the vote was yes. This is not to imply it was smooth sailing. There was much anxiety, understandably, and parents continued to call, voice their personal concerns to my secretary, Mrs. Band Booster President. Regardless, once the vote was decided, the trip funding and planning became an obsession. We had 18 months before May 6, 1998, departure for Moscow. Logistics and travel. This was a different experience for a band trip. The band in the past had traveled to competitions and such as the Festival of States in Florida, but flying across the ocean to perform in another country Russia, 8 time zones away, for a week required much preparation. Thankfully, we had the IFAI to guide us with the logistics and the connections with the State Department, U.S. Consulate, embassies, and the Russian Ministry of Culture for all the official authorizations and requirements for our group. What we had to do and learn from foreign travel. Okay, so band travel logistics, of course, includes the people, the students, the staff, the parents, but the amount of equipment was another concern. Custom declarations, all instruments, flags, uniform, music had to be cataloged, documented with the description, serial number, dimension, and metric, weight, dollar value, and the person declaring ownership of that item on their personal customs declaration. The comprised spreadsheet had to be sent 30 days in advance to the IFAI and included in the crates of equipment that we boxed everything in. A quick note on that customs declaration. So we had roughly 100 band students, but we had a lot more equipment. You could declare one thing. If you played a flute, you're good. If you played a flute and a clarinet and a bassoon, you had to have somebody else declare that. And uniforms, who declares those? Parents. So we had parents declaring amplifiers, bassoons, units, flags, so anyway, their name was on the list. We used, to get the weight, we used high-tech equipment to weigh each item. The band members lined up in the band room with their instrument and their customs form to be completed and had their instrument weighed on a bathroom scale. When it was time to bus to O'Hara, the equipment was crated and trucked to Chicago and back by band dads Rich Butkey and Steve Krebs. Equipment transport was a smooth process going over, but coming home, Jim Calla and I learned the persuasion of the American dollar, and it was needed to get an amplifier, $20, we'll put it on the plane. And boxes of equipment, you have to open it and show us. No, how about $50? Okay, put it on the plane. I found the Russian people, honestly, I found out Russian people were very honest and open people. But these guys had us at a disadvantage. Fortunately, Slava, our interpreter, helped Jim and I with the negotiation. And it wasn't a bribe, it was a tip. So, the total declared value of the equipment was $216,000. That's $393,000 today. There's no way I was not going to bring it home because I didn't want to have to deal with Mr. Neal after that. The equipment list and a lot of the documents that we had are scattered about the room along the walls. Have a look. It's pretty nostalgic, at least. Other things, passports. Everyone was required to have a passport to get through immigration, both Russia and the United States. Visas, likewise. Everyone was required to have a visa, completed and approved by the Russian embassy 60 days before departure, and always carried with them while in Moscow in their money belt. Remember those? Exchange rates. Well, that's something different. Russians like the US dollar, especially in the airport, but rubles were the currency. The exchange rate then was 60 rubles per dollar. Language. Well, what can I say? Their English was a heck of a lot better than our Russian. But interpreters such as Slava and Rita were with us every step of the way to get past those barriers. Air travel, a new experience for many, and it was a 11-hour flight, non-stop, one way. And about the same on the way home. I think it was a little shorter on the way home. Medical person. This was required for every band trip because we had a lot of kids who had albuterol and medicines and an assortment of things that they had to take, but they could not have that on their person. That was with the medical director. Dr. Merck graciously accepted the responsibility for the kids' medicine. Kids, they're 40-some odd years old now. Same age I was when we did this. Medicine for their health. Dr. Merck, as I recall, is Adam and Scott Welty's grandfather. Venue planning. Telephone and faxing with communication technology available at that time seems so antiquated today. My IFAI contact, George Gordon, was in Moscow, as was the Russian Ministry of Culture chairman, Viktor Demchenko. Itinerary updates and coordination of venue planning was by fax, Moscow time. There were roughly 10 revisions of the band itinerary alone, to include what Alexander Demchenko and Mr. Neal agreed to be the best experience for the students. Mr. Neal had his suggested changes. I would let the IFAI know by marking up and returning the fax. Call Roberta Gordon to explain and clarify what all this, what the changes need to be. And the fax cycle was repeated until finalized on May 2nd of 1998. Even though we were always reminded, be flexible. Nothing was for sure when you were in Russia. The VIP itinerary was very much the same and followed the band because they wanted to see, anytime the band performed, the parents wanted to be there. For the most part, it followed the band, except during practice sessions, visit to the military academy, and the orphanage. This is when the parents were sent to the bistros, the bars, the art museum, and the tour of the subway, which was a museum in its own right. The only fax machine available to me then, I don't think I even had a home computer at that time, but the only fax machine available to me then was my department fax machine at Cincinnati Millicron. Late night runs to intercept fax in the office required me to check in with the security desk before I could even get into the building. As this became a regular thing at midnight, I was asked, Lampy, what are you up to? You never know where the truth will lead. What happened in Cincinnati? I thought, oh my God, here we go. I'm going to get fired. Millicron had a lot of companies that had defense contracts that we built machine tools to build their parts. And Russia was like, well, we weren't always on the best terms. Cincinnati Millicron Security ended up donating 150 Cincinnati Millicron ball caps from their soccer team, I guess, for all to wear to, quote, as they said, help keep that traveling herd identified and together. And it worked. I mean, we were in Chicago, and there they are, everybody with those white hats. The final itinerary is posted along the walls. It is jam-packed with performances. I think it's over there. Fundraising. Oh boy. There was not a weekend without some sort of fundraising activity for over a year. Much of the work was shared by both parents and band members and some of their siblings. The perennial fundraisers was the Roger Bacon Band Invitational, the Monte Carlo, and the Roger Bacon Guard Invitational. Those basically supported the band, but that wasn't going to do Russia. Yard sales at St. Rita's, the first of a long list of events. Kroger cards. The program was different than it is today. The cards were loaded with dollar amounts, and the band got a percentage. This was initiated by Gwen King. I think that was Mike Jones' mom. She worked for Kroger's. And it was managed by Bob Friel, who is Maria's dad. Seeds. Everyone remembers seeds. That was a good moneymaker. Packing seeds for the Y2K survival kits earned us honestly, earned us $10 a month, or $10 a box, months of weekends filling envelopes with 16 different varieties of seeds from 50-pound sacks using a teaspoon and a measuring cup. The Cincinnati Enquirer newspaper stuffing, we got 5 cents a paper. It was every Saturday until all skids of paper were bundled for the Sunday delivery. Party on a Point, we had a beer booth. Avon, Mary Kay, McAlpin's, Pamper Chef, all were smaller fundraisers but contributed to the bottom line. Perkins Night, parents came for dinner, students served, and the band was paid. Kroger Holiday Food Prep, cold, slippery floors, and late hours as I remember filling containers with green beans, yams, and other vegetables. ATP event for food service, that was also with Kroger's. We were serving food to the guests. And Cincinnati Reds and Bengals food concessions at Riverfront. Many games. Donations. Many generous donations to the band was resulting from an endless writing campaign to get the word out. The Bacon Band was going to the United States, was going to represent the United States, Ohio, Roger Bacon High School, in Moscow, Russia, for a cultural exchange. We wrote letters to our past sponsors, alumni, newspapers, TV and radio stations, state and U.S. Congress, Ohio governors, archdiocese, even to the President of the United States, who was Bill Clinton at the time. Many replied with well wishes, donations, Ohio state flags, and a letter from President Bill Clinton. Donations filled the financial gap that working fundraisers could not. Listing all the donors would take a long time, even if I had the list today. But I like to note there were band parents who donated to sponsor multiple students, as well as working the fundraisers, teachers such as Mr. McGrath, who donated $2,000 for Students' Way. Non-band parents who traveled to Moscow with the band and paid their own ticket, plus the ticket of a band member. And one notable band alumni asked, "How much are you falling short?" I told him, $45,000. His response was, "This band's going to Moscow," and floated us a loan for that amount and asked for only half of it to be repaid, which the booster did in 6 months. He wanted to remain anonymous at the time, but this was a band alum who was a former drum major around 1980. His name was Greg Martini. The end result, $220,000 was raised in a little over a year, 25 years ago. That's roughly $400,000 today. On a sad note, all of the effort to fulfill the financial needs for a full cultural exchange, the St. Petersburg Children's Choir from Russia decided not to come to the United States the following year in 1999 due to Russian parental concerns. But we had the finances to host them. We had some things lined up for them, but because that was the agreement. To wrap up, 95 band members, Mr. Neal, 3 band staff, Brian, Rick, and Nancy, the RV principal, Roger Bossi, 50 boosters, and $216,000 worth of band equipment flew 5,000 miles from Chicago O'Hara to Moscow, performed and were treated like rock stars, played in the prestigious Moscow music halls and on Red Square, participated in their Victory Day celebration, toured the city in a cultural experience of a lifetime, and returned safely home to the Colton Center where we started. This was a remarkable effort by dedicated band people that paid off. Every parent could have not been more proud of their sons and daughters and what they did in Moscow, as it showcased the best. And in return, were very well received by the people of Russia. On a personal note, and shared by many, this trip to perform in the music halls of the great composers in a city of old and remarkable culture was a testament to Wes Neal and the band program that he had built in the 30 years prior. Thank you, Wes. Thank you very much.
$250,000 and 100 people to go to Russia. That's not bad year's work. That is not a bad year's work. A couple of administrative things. I've seen some pictures going up, all right? Use the hashtag, jeez, Joe. Hashtag RBHS Moscow 98. Okay, that's RBHS Moscow 98. Right? My vision is terrible, guys. It's just not good. And then program and postcard keepsakes, right, are up along the tables. Use a QR code to scan so that you can get some of that stuff. And if you haven't had a chance to take a look around once the program's over, make sure you do so. This stuff is really cool. Bring back some really cool memories for you guys. All right, so here's what's going to happen next. We're going to play a highlight video, all right? And then Chuck Metzger is going to come up and do a presentation, and then you're going to hear from Steve Shad. All right? So that's what's coming next. JP.
Exhale. Here's one right here. Oh, this is the place we just ate at. It was delicious. This is the famous Gorky Park. Everybody warming up.
We'd like to thank the Mr. of Culture and the General for the invitation to go here today, and of course the International Fine Arts Institute. This is the Roger Bacon Humble Band, and we thank you very, very much for the warm welcome. First, I'd like to introduce my Assistant Director, Mr. Brian Neal, and our drum major who will be directing now, Mr. T.J. Robeson.
Hello, everyone. As Joe mentioned, I have a presentation to give. It's about 30 minutes long. Actually, I'm just here to thank some people that helped make tonight happen. First of all, big thanks to Jeff Lamb, who put together that video we just watched. More than 25 years ago, this trip to Moscow was just an invitation and a dream. And the first step of that journey was to get the school to let us make this trip. Our principal at the time was Roger Bossi. He's here with us tonight. Thank you very much for all your support. We had the support of the administration back then. We have the support of the administration today for this event. They not only let us use this amazing building for tonight, they helped us with alumni contact information, advertising, setting up, bartending. We have Principal Steve Shadd here tonight, Tom Burke, Brandon Spaeth, Alyssa Flading, JP, John Powers, Sue Jurkamp, and again, our great bartenders. Thanks everybody for being here. Back in April of 2015, our friend and band member Mike Jones put together a Facebook page. It was called the RBHS Marching Band Moscow 98. Kind of served as a repository for all the memories and pictures, a lot of the stuff that we used here tonight. So thanks to Mike Jones for putting that together. I don't think he's here today. Part of my job with this whole thing was contacting as many of you as possible. And I had a lot of help with that. I wanted to recognize some people that helped me contact all of you guys. Karen Wiles Lampy, Kyle Newman, Ryan Budke, and Keely Henry. Thank you very much for your help. And finally, I just wanted to clear something up. A lot of people thanked me for putting this together. I was a very small piece of a larger committee that helped put this together. I just want to recognize Jeff Lampy, Patty James, Brian Neal, Ray Fowler, and of course Joe Fowler for getting this thing together. Thank you, Mr. Joe Interviews, for making the trip. Thank you very much for being here. You did a great job emceeing. You're a great role model for all of us. We really appreciate that. And finally, thanks to all of you for coming here tonight. Without you guys here, this would be nothing. So, thank you.
I don't know how to respond to that. Thanks, Chuck. It's rare that I'm left speechless, as you might imagine. And with that, we welcome Steve Shadd to the stage. Come on up.
Good evening. My name is Steve Shadd. I'm principal here at Roger Bacon. I'm finishing my 12th year, and in 2 weeks we'll have our 95th graduating class from Roger Bacon, so we're really happy with that, and we're looking forward to the summer. I'd like to welcome everybody back. This is quite an event, and a very important one in Roger Bacon's history. I gave a couple of guided tours to people who haven't been back for a while. This has changed a little bit, hasn't it? And if you haven't been back and have an opportunity to walk around, this is a beautiful difference than when you were here. My job a lot of times is to get up and try to describe Roger Bacon. And I'm going to tell a story that I tell at our celebration of success. And I think it kind of encapsulates what Roger Bacon is and what it was when you were here. I spent 20 years in the Marine Corps. I was a captain at one point, and I was stationed up at headquarters Marine Corps. And the services were called over to the Undersecretary of Defense's office, and we had to give a briefing on our status of forces. My job was to carry my general's briefcase. And so I picked up the briefcase, went over with the general and the colonel, and we went over to the Pentagon. All the services were represented there. The first service that went up was the Air Force. And the Air Force gave a phenomenal briefing. They had a packet color pictures, information about all their intercontinental ballistic missiles and their jet fighters and their bomber wings. It was phenomenal. Numbers and locations for all of them. Great pictures. The Army followed that. Same type of thing. Beautiful pictures, a big pamphlet, all of their main battle tanks, Apache helicopters, where all their assets were located all over the United States and the world. Phenomenal. Beautiful, beautiful. The Navy then followed. The same thing. An admiral got up and talked about their aircraft carriers and destroyers and cruisers, submarines, pictures, information about all of those. And then it was our turn. In the Marine Corps, I got up and the general stood up and he said, Captain, could you open up my briefcase? I opened up the briefcase, and inside was a piece of loose leaf paper and a pen. And I thought, you gotta be kidding me, I have one job. And I brought the wrong briefcase. So I was a little nervous. General looked at me and said, Skipper, could you just hand me what's in the briefcase? So I handed him a piece of paper and I handed him a pen. And the general went up to the table, wrote on the piece of paper the number 176,217. And he handed it to the Undersecretary of Defense. The Undersecretary of Defense looked at it and he said, what is this? And he said, sir, you have 176,217 combat-ready Marines. Those are our greatest asset. And I never forgot that. Never forgot it. When you come back to Roger Bacon, you can tour the facilities. This is beautiful, isn't it? And we can show you a lot of improvements. It is not Roger Bacon. That is not who we are. If I had my kids here, I'd bring them up on the stage and say, this is Roger Bacon. It's the same now as when it was when you were here. Because when you were here, it was never about the buildings or the organizations. It was always about you. Always about you. And that is the one thing that has not changed here at Roger Bacon. So what I would ask every one of you is to come back. Come back to Roger Bacon, see my kids. Walk the halls. Talk to them. You would be very, very proud. There are some things that never change. And this is a beautiful place, but this is not who we are. It wasn't who you were when you were here. And you will find the same thing here at Roger Bacon. I am so proud of these kids. Our future is in good hands. Our future is in good hands. Please come back and visit us. Walk the halls. Talk to my kids. If you come back at lunch, we feed you for free. If you feed them, they will come. Right? So come back to Roger Bacon, sit down, eat lunch with my kids, walk the halls, talk to anybody you want, go into any classroom you want. They love when you come back here. They love when you come back here. That's the best way I can describe Roger Bacon. I was given a real quick tour beforehand, and somebody asked, are you guys still going to merge with Purcell? I heard that when I came here. Roger Bacon is 521 kids strong. 521. We have had a waiting list for 11 years in a row. We are absolutely full at this particular point. We are not an elite school. We take kids up and down the chain. I think that's very Franciscan, and that's who we are. Now, when I got here 12 years ago, real quick, I asked the Franciscans, can you please give me a recruiting slogan of some sort? A recruiting slogan. What I got was about a 2-page term paper. I couldn't use it. I've been here for 12 years, and I can tell you in my mind what Franciscan means. And you'll see it in my kids. Everyone has value. St. Francis saw it in all of nature. He saw it in the leper. And it's a story and a message that we cannot tell our kids enough today. When you come here, These kids will hear this every single day. They have value. And I firmly believe when they believe that they have value, they treat themselves and they treat other people differently. Walk the halls here. You know what you're going to find out? You're going to find kids that will say thank you and please and yes sir and yes ma'am and hold the doors. Those are courtesies that somewhere we have lost. In my generation, those were expectations. And we've lost those. You'll find them here. You'll find them here. So please come back. Keep us in your prayers. Walk the halls. Talk to my kids. Eat our lunches. You'll be safe. It's better than the Russian food that I saw up there. All right? And please come back and enjoy being part of Roger Bacon. Now this summer, we are going to redo the apron out front. And in the apron, we have a timeline of the 42 most significant events in Roger Bacon's history. This trip is in that timeline and will be immortalized in stone out front. So when you have an opportunity to come back and see it, we appreciate it. And again, on behalf of all my kids who couldn't be here, thank you very much. God bless every one of you. God bless Roger Bacon.
That was fantastic. Let me do a quick change out of the equipment here. You got this one on? Turn this one off. Apparently we've gone long enough with killing the microphones now. 1, 2? All right, excellent. Right now in heaven, Bruce just called out, "Hey, Mom, Joe's going to try to talk about Dad in 5 minutes without crying. Let's go see if he can do it." Well, tonight is a testament to the power of we. None of this would be possible without one man. The arc of my life changed in this room 33 years ago. See, during the entrance exam, after you took the test, you'd come in here and they would show you all the different stuff, the activities that they had here at Bacon. Included in that was the marching band. The drum major, guy who jumped around more than he directed, by the name of Matt Schlappman, led a performance in which the band peeled the paint off the wall. And I thought to myself, I came here this morning because Bacon was my backup school. I'm going to X. I really hope I did well enough to get in because I want to be a part of that. Sign me up for that. Turns out that I did well enough to get in. Thank you. And my life changed and got better since. And it's because of Mr. Wes Neal, a man who had the audacity, unmitigated audacity, and you heard it in one of the stories about John Mayer walking up to a group of adults and them saying, "Who's leading this group?" And John going, "Well, us, the kids." He had the audacity to entrust teenagers to self-government. He had the ability to know how to motivate each and every one of us individually. And he did that by taking the time to know us, by putting in the effort and the work to get to know each individual student. He used a mixture of discipline and love to teach us to hold ourselves and each other accountable. He showed us how to be aware and then to act. I could stand up here until midnight telling you stories. But there is one moment that made me so proud to be an alumni of the Roger Bacon Marching Band. I was in my dorm room at Ohio University. UC was playing a tournament game. And as CBS was going to commercial, they showed the UC pep band. And in that pep band was an alumni of West Neal's Roger Bacon Marching Band. When this young woman started here, the idea of going to college, getting on a plane, and playing an instrument in the pep band of an NCAA tournament game was as far away from her as going to the moon was for you and I. And yet she did that. She walked through the door that Mr. Neal built. She walked through the door that you all kept open for her and for thousands of others. I think of the families that sent multiple kids to Mr. Neal. Just a couple of them came to mind. The Arises, the Stenses, the Smiths, the Glassmeyers, the Myers, the Lampies, the Schweitzers. I know all of their parents. I know all of their mothers. And all of those mothers are formidable women. None of them brokered any bull. So why would they send them to Mr. Neal? Why would they trust their babies? Because they knew at the end of every day, he put our best at the center of every interaction. He never missed a chance to teach. I always knew he loved me. Next to my mother, he is the single greatest influence I have ever known. And without him, I would not have the confidence and conviction to be the father, husband, friend, and worker I am today. More than any of the other stories you have heard here tonight, he is the reason we are all here. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the boss, Mr. Wes Neal.
I'm going to sit down because the knees are gone. Too many parades, irregular football fields. First of all, I want to thank the council that put this all together and brought us all back together for a change. And I'd like to thank you all for being here tonight. I know there's others that would like to be here, but just can't. Now, the sad part is you're going to have to listen to me for a few minutes. And as you were in band, you know where I'm going. When you talk about this band, you have to talk about the people who put us here in the first place. Those people that went before us made this possible. But in the end, you made that happen, and not just the students, but the parents as well. There's no organization that works as well together as the band boosters and the band. And Russia was a perfect example of the culmination of both groups working together. There are two people that made this possible, and made this band possible and set it up way before you were born. And I want to pay tribute to them before, and let you know that they were the guys that made it possible for us to make the trip. First of all, I hate people that say you were so lucky, you were in the right place at the right time. You're so lucky. Is that TJ? There he is. I'm sorry, I've been looking for him all night. I don't believe luck has anything to do with it. I believe that God puts you in the right place at the right time. And I've been so blessed to be the right place. I really don't think I was that great a director or that great of a teacher, but I had great students, and I had great parents and people behind us. To give you an example of being in the right place at the right time, when I was 7 years old, our band director came in and was recruiting, much like I recruited you guys to be in our band, to be in his band. He didn't have to do much recruiting because I love music. Music was always different. There was always a new song. There was an all different style. There was everything. So Mr. Hurt was my band director, and he was also my trumpet teacher. I didn't know who Mr. Hurt was because it was always Mr. Hurt. And when you came in here, it was Father or Mr. so forth. Years later, many years later, when Dick Brown had a stroke, one of our great teachers, he called me and asked if I would please play with him, because for some reason when we played together, he could play, but he couldn't do it by himself anymore because of the stroke. And I agreed. I said, sure, fine, no problem, and I'll be happy to. One of the three bands that we were in was the Gentlemen of Swing, run by one of our other great teachers, Harold Diamond. Harold Diamond put a lower brass section together. When you went to Russia, it was unbelievable. And at the end of the rehearsal, Harold says, where did you learn to improvise like that? Where did you learn to ad-lib like that? And I said, well, my grade school band director, Mr. Hurt. He said, do you know who that was? And I said, no. He says, that's Gerald Hurt. That's Al Hurt's brother. They both came to Cincinnati to be at the Conservatory of Music. Al left early, but Gerald stayed on because he loved Cincinnati, all the music and so forth. I'm right place, right time. Then my high school band director turns out to be Andy Brady, Andrew J. Brady, as you heard. He's the guy who's the great high school director that his name is on the new theater down at the Banks. He taught me more in 4 years in high school how to put a band together, how to take a piece of music and chop it up and then build it up and so forth, how to work with others. I wanted to be like him. I wanted to make it, be just like him and make a difference in kids' lives. Prepare them for life, prepare them for the future. As you grow older, you realize you are no Andy Brady, and you're not as good as you think you can be. At any rate, after 4 years at the conservatory, I came to a fork in the road. My professor at the University of Cincinnati, my trumpet professor, had set me up with auditions in New York because I wanted to play in the pit bands and someday play on Broadway and direct a pit band musical. In other words, you remember us playing over there on the side. And the other thing I wanted to do was to be a high school band director. So I said, Lord, give me an idea of what to do here. I'm going to get a job because at that point I didn't have the money to go to New York. My funds were gone. My mom and dad helped me all the way through college, and I wasn't going to go back and ask them again. So I was getting a job, and I said, let me know, Lord, please point me in the right direction. If I make the money and get to New York, that's what I'm going to do. On the other hand, if I get a high school job that's what I'll do. And I went around checking high schools, but see, I hedged my bets just a little bit. Because I didn't want to be a grade school band director. I didn't want to be a junior high. I was in a hurry. I wanted to be a high school band director. And that don't happen out of college. It just never happens. The only other guy I know is Sam Reynolds, who was taken right out of college and went to Princeton High School. And the chance of me getting a high school job right out of it was impossible. It wasn't going to happen. Now, let's skip to the first person that really was important to this band and set up all the real rules and regulations. The real teachers are out in that hall. Mr. Shad told you, take a walk out there and see who the real teachers were, the real people that made a difference in this school. And the ones that really made lasting improvements and built this school are out there in bronze. And one right by the door is Father Andrew Fox. He was a principal at Roger Bacon. He was a visionary. He could do anything. He was so intelligent. He was an entrepreneur above entrepreneurs. He started as a teacher at Roger Bacon, then became the principal at Roger Bacon, and then they gave him several years off because in those days they moved the Franciscans around. And he had now come back in 1955, 56, because at this time the school had over 1,500 young men in here. And it needed an identity, because this was right around the time of baby boom. It needed something for the school to rally around and say, that's Roger Bacon, so forth and so on. And with 1,500 kids, obviously athletics was going to be the thing. So Father Andrew went out to, I believe, Illinois, talked to a very well-known college coach, talked his college coach into leaving that state, taking a pay cut, and come here to Roger Bacon and coach a high school football team. Now, he had another identity problem, because by now, Bron Basovich, his teams are coming into really, they're not just winning the GCL, they're winning the city and so forth. And now they're getting ready to play Canton McKinley, Mass Swan, Cleveland St. Joe's, and so forth. And they had a problem at halftime. They had a band that struggled to get through the Star Spangled Banner. And there were only about 22, 23 of them. So Father Andrew went and made a phone call to Dean Wilhide, the dean at the College Conservatory, looking for a band director. Right person in the right place. I was always there. I wasn't good, I wasn't great, but I didn't have to be. It's not right people. Now I'm sure Father Andrew said, I don't need a genius. I don't need all I need is somebody that can get the job done, because I have the man to make the group great. And that was the other man, Father Celsus Grease. He was Father Andrew's protege. He was going to be that, and was, that entrepreneur, that genius that made the band good. And he did. He was great. So obviously now I know where I'm going. I'm going to take the job and so forth. And Father Andrew is now explaining your budget for the year is $2,000. You couldn't run the band for a half year for $2,000. And then he proceeds to say, you cannot have a band booster organization because we already have an athletic organization, and we can't keep, And on top of that, you can't sell candy bars because the parents are already paying money to get in here, and we don't want to sell candy bars. And I learned in one of the few things I learned from UC in my psychology classes, when you're dealing with a very intelligent person, it's not what they're saying all the time, it's what they're not saying. And Father Celsus and I immediately, when we got together, said, He wants us to go outside Roger Bacon. He doesn't want us to stay inside. He wants this band to be outside, out to the people. You can't go to elder territory and say, would you support our athletics? We play on the field. But if you're a good musician, an outstanding entertainer, I don't care if you went to St. X, Purcell territory, elder, and we did, they not only listened to us, they pay us. And that's what we got going. Now let's fast forward to 37 years forward. You guys are just finishing coming off the field at Lucas Oil Stadium, playing a competition that it was impossible to win. This is a competition 3 days, starting at 9 o'clock in the morning, going to 11 o'clock at night. Every 15 minutes, another band comes on, and they're from all over the country. But you went out and put on a show. What you didn't know is there were people there waiting for you. There were people there that knew the Roger Bacon Band. Now, I could give all kinds of examples, but I'm going to use the Festival of States, which you got to go to. Didn't get to perform, you got to stand at second base and play. But you got there. In 1968, we got offered to go to the Festival of States in St. Petersburg, Florida, for the first National Band Championships. Now, in 1962, I'm finally getting smart, and I say, you know, we got to do something to recruit here, and what can you do with young men? And at that point, we had gone from 26 kids, well, we really went from 20. I walked in, there were 2 freshmen that wanted to be in band, and the rest of them were told that you'd signed up for band last year, you're going to be in band this year. It's a true story, true. And would you believe, at the end of the year, only 2 kids quit, the rest of them stayed. The 2 that quit were twins, and they were models, and they didn't have time. But the rest of the kids all stayed. And by 1962, I thought, we got to start competing. Competing would be something that young men would like to do and go out on that field and so forth. But there are no competitions in Cincinnati. There's no marching band competition. You know, there are only marching band the first marching band competition in Cincinnati was the QCSI, the Roger Bacon Queen City Spartan Invitational. Father Celsus saw us recruiting. The only place to really compete in the whole state was the VFW, the Veterans of Foreign Wars. He had a convention. 1 year in Cincinnati, 1 year in Cleveland, 1 year in Columbus, and then back to Cincinnati again. And to get bands in their parades, they started a competition. We won 6 of those in a row. Undefeated, went right down the line. So we get an invitation to go to the Festival of States. 1 band from each state. Now, you know there's nobody going to be coming from Rhode Island or Hawaii or, but it was a really good setup and a real competition. We were on the first there. 3 years later, oh, by the way, before I forget, Father Celsus figures, well, we got to raise money to go on this trip. It was going to be a week in Florida. So he calls the governor. Yeah, he just picks up the phone and calls the governor. He says, we need help. We are the one band representing the state of Ohio, and we need help. And the governor said, all right, let me give you a couple of corporate places to go. They'll help you 1 time only. Don't call me back. But those people helped us to make that first trip. Now, the governor says, I'm going to be in trouble. We got to start a band competition. So they start the competition at the state fair and hey, we're ready. So we went and won 2 of those right in a row. Third one got rained out, like we did in Florida, and that was the end of those. But we get another call from St. Petersburg saying, hey, you're the state champions, come on down again. The people loved us down there, they really did. Consequently, we went for every 3 years from there on in until 1996, when we got rained out, and that was the last competition they had there. Because several bands wanted to sue the Festival of States because for the money it cost them to go down there. Now think of the quality of band that we had for almost 30 years in a row, being the representative of the state, winning championship after championship and so forth. So now these people are there waiting to see you and watch you. But in the back of their mind, this is a band that went to a Super Bowl. This is a band that went to the Festival of States. This is the band that won consecutive championships in Traverse City, Michigan. This is the band that plays with the Cincinnati Pops. Do you have any idea? Well, you couldn't possibly, but if you knew, you'd be shaking in your boots. You'd be saying, my God, are they expecting us to live up to that? Well, you went out on the field, did your job, played professionally, and did well. But you didn't know that you were going to have to live up to that kind of reputation. In the meantime, they were there to watch you unload the buses, or unload the trucks. They watched you warm up and tune up. They watched you enter the field, and most of all, they watched you off the field. How would you represent the United States? Are you good kids? Are you caring people? In the Festival of States, we used to have to walk through the park. They had a big band shell, and you would walk through the park, and all these little old ladies and little old men were sitting there because this was a retirement place. They would have a concert in the afternoon and the evening in the band shell, and bands from one band from Florida especially, they were lucky if they had 60 people in their audience. Our performances were over 100. That place was filled. The reason was, when you walked through that park, the first year we were there, I'm sitting back and we had lunch, breakfast and dinner at the Orange Blossom Cafeteria. Remember the Orange Blossom? Wonderful place. Even Brian liked that food. But when you went through, the little old people would say, hi, how are you? Where are you from? And the other bands would walk by and say, thank you, and we're from Indiana, or we're from whatever, and just keep going. The first day we did it, the kids came back late, and I said, where were you? And he said, well, these people are talking to us, so forth and so on. And I arranged the schedule because they were kind enough and feeling enough and gentlemen and ladies enough to sit down and talk with these people that had nobody else to talk with, nobody else. When we had a concert, they were there, and so forth. Same thing happened at the Lucas Oil Dome. What you didn't know is, while you were out after the competition, and you didn't have horseplay, you were having fun together. They watched you, you stuck together, you didn't run different areas, one crowd over there, you ate together, you sat together. They didn't even know where the band director was. When I got a call that Monday morning, they said, where were you? I said, well, I was back in Cincinnati. You were in Cincinnati? Yeah. I said, I had seen far too many of my friends get heart attacks and high blood pressure and go nuts. I gained weight. But I saw too many of my friends, and I stopped going to competitions. It was nothing I could do. Once they were prepared, once that you knew what you were going to do on that field, they didn't need us. They didn't need me. So, Rick Wolfel, Nancy Enright, and Brian. First time I had assistant. First time that somebody, in 1960, Father Andrew forgot to explain that I would have no assistance whatsoever. We're playing in Super Bowls and all over the place, and it's just me, a drum instructor, and a flag instructor. And the drum instructor and flag instructor are pretty much on their thing. Now I had an assistant. When Brian graduated, he came on to be my assistant. I had somebody to say, "Are you sure you want to do that? Have you talked to the kids about this?" Because he had been in the band, he knew what it was about. And I had somebody to, go through it. So my son was the band director down there, and she went, who was running the band? And I said, well, that time, most people don't run the band. The kids already know what they're going to do. They know what their job is. They'll do it. And then she couldn't believe this. And she says, I saw people making suggestions, but I didn't see anybody saying, you do this, you go over there, and so forth. They tuned up, they warmed up, they did everything. And then at the end, they had people come up to you, unbeknownst to you, and say, hi, how are you? Where are you from? Some of you don't realize it, but you were talking to people from the International Fine Arts Institute, finding how you tear up with other people. So on Monday morning, I get a phone call from the International Fine Arts Institute. I get a first call, 8 o'clock in the morning. So obviously, we were the first band they picked. And I get this, we want to invite you to go to Russia and represent the United States and so forth and so on. And I'm thinking, this is great, but it's way out of our, how much is it going to cost? And basically it was the plane fare over and so forth, but it was just tremendous. Meanwhile, you guys came in 7th period, and I told you, don't get your horns out, just get seated, we're going to talk. That means one of two things, right? He's not happy, or he is happy. And I was happy. And I explained to you what you had done and how well you'd done it. That you went out there and put on a show, and they didn't pick the first band. They didn't pick anyone in the Sweet 16. They didn't even pick anybody in the top 20. They picked us. That's the reason you compete, even when you're stacked against you. Then you find out how really good you are, what kind of people you really are. If you compete against the best, knowing you're not going to win, but you put your best on the field. So I congratulated you. What an honor it was to be invited to go there. What an honor we're never going to get to go, but we should be happy and pleased and satisfied with ourselves and what we did. Now I get a phone call. I come home and Carol says, Jeff Lampy's on the phone and he wants you to call him right away, so forth. And I called him and Jeff says, I understand we got invited to Russia. I'm thinking, Jeff, this is not like we're invited to go downtown. This isn't Moscow, Ohio. This is Russia. And he says, I want to give it a chance. I want to, and I said, and I painted the bleakest picture in the world. It took us 3 years each year to build up enough money to go to Florida for 10 days or 7 days. And here we didn't even have, we had maybe 4 or 5 months to make the money. But Jeff said, no, I want to give it a try. I said, well, it's up to Roger Bossy. He's the principal. He's the guy that makes these decisions. Now, all of our principals, God bless him. I'm sure Father Andrew didn't say, by the way, when I'm gone, I told them they could go wherever they wanted to go and they could travel to wherever they wanted to travel and so forth. And by the way, he didn't mention Russia. But the principals, every time we would go and say, can we go to Traverse City? Can we go to the Super Bowl? Can we go to... They will always say yes. They'd wait, let me think about it, so forth and so on. But they always stayed true because they saw how hard you worked. Not just on the band and in the football field, and so, but in the classrooms as well. We had good students. Over 75% on the honor roll every year. But now we had a different situation. And Roger Bosnia had to make a decision. We're talking a lot of money here. And he had to consider the school. And he had to consider, you know, this was a gigantic decision to make. I figured, well, I'm free third period, so I'll go down and talk to him and let him know that Jeff is on his way. And prepare him and let him know what's going on. At the end of my first period, second period architectural engineering class I was teaching, there's a knock on the door and Jeff comes and he's all smiles. He says, "Father says we can do it." Father says it's okay. Now, on one thing I'm thinking, this is great. Plus, we have the right person in the right place. Clearly, the picture I painted to Jeff, he knew the magnitude of what it was going to be done. Clearly, he knew that he was going to get the support of the Band Booster Board. And clearly, the Band Booster Board knew they were going to get the support of the rest of the boosters. This had to be a group effort. It wasn't just the kids, it had to be all of us. And then on the other hand, I'm thinking, what is Father Roger going to say when I walk in that door, because I didn't warn him. He was unprepared for this, obviously, and Jeff had to explain the whole thing. He must have done a heck of a job, I'll tell you. And I remember going up there during my third period and thinking, oh, this is going to be bad. I'm going to get dressed down and all so forth and so on. Roger's mother was the secretary. And as I walked into the door, she says, "He's in there waiting for you." And, oh, this is, God help me now. When I walked in the door, he was intrigued. He asked all the right questions. Do we have the band that can do this? Do we have the band that could go over there and perform in front of foreigners? We were the foreigners in front of them, and so forth. Do we have the ability to do it? Over the years, there were two things that I looked at to find out how good our band was. And it wasn't competitions. The first one was solo ensemble. Solo ensemble is when you stood with an accompanist in front of a judge. Sometimes we were in a quartet or a trio, but even those guys that were in quartets and trios went into solo. You could go into three things, and our kids were going into three of them. And you were in front of a judge, sitting in the back, which is giving you the old, "I am the judge." And the rest of the room was filled with other students from other schools and their parents and some of our parents. What better place to show how good you were as a musician and how self-controlled you were as a room like that? The second one was our musical pit orchestra. We played the Broadway music that they played on Broadway, not watered down. We played the exact same score that they played in the Broadway musicals when we played the musicals. And I transposed all the string parts to the saxophone because we didn't have any strings. And so the saxophones were even double timing it because they were playing string parts. I was in the right place at the right time. The reason was, you were good, not because of me, but because of people like Bob Durr, Harold Diamond, Dick Brown. Those guys really made you musicians. I was in the right place at the right time. All I had to do was sit up there. I didn't have to be a good, and I wasn't a good band director. I understand that now. I was average at best. But I had great students and great staff and great people behind me. And those people, I remember this day, Bob Durr. You remember Bob Durr? Yeah. Bob Durr, when he came in, it's 1970. He started with us, believe it or not, in 1970. And I'm not going to teach all your instruments. I'm only going to teach the best. Because I don't want to teach just anybody. Bob, how long do you need to know before you're going to pick the ones you wanted? A month. 2 weeks, maybe. 2 weeks go by, nothing. Month goes by, nothing. How's it going, Bob? It's going great. Everything's fine. Everything's wonderful. And finally, I say, Bob, you're going to have to make a decision. What decision's that? Well, which ones are you going to teach? What do you mean, which one am I going to teach? I mean, they're my students. So I'm going to teach them all. And he did. He taught every saxophone, every clarinet, every flute. He taught the whole. And how many of you were told in solo ensemble, I don't think you got it. I don't think you're going. You're not ready to go. You're staying home. And then come in and Brian to sit there and just keep a straight face, because I don't think we have anybody ready to go this year. This is a bad year. This is a bad year. When you were sophomores, we broke all our own records. We had the most kids going from any school to solo ensemble, the best records. In your junior year, we had far more superiors than we had excellence rate. And we were, But God bless him, when the time came, Bob was there for you at the solo ensemble. He was there to tune you up, give you a pep talk, and get you ready to go, and so forth. So, we were ready. We had the band, we had the thing. Next thing was that the boosters had the toughest job. I had the easiest. Jeff had the hardest, I had the softest. So now, we're going to Russia. I'm going to wind it up, I promise. But I got to talk about two things over in Russia. One of them is May 9th. The other one is, well, I'll get there. When we go to Russia, this isn't a different country, okay? When I say different country, I mean they don't even believe in contracts over there. Thank God. But and so we went over, and all those things that you learned about walking through the park in St. Petersburg were magnified now. People were stopping for your autographs. You were playing performances out of this world, but you were also, this country could not have picked a better group of young people to represent this country than you. There's no way in my mind whatsoever. To paraphrase that, we went to an orphanage. We spent several hours there. I believe we played a concert for them, and then we played with them, and they had a great time. And what our kids didn't realize in Russia is most of those kids, families are still there. They're not orphans because they don't have any family, their family passed away. Their families couldn't afford them. So they would turn them over to the orphanages, to live in the orphanages and take care of themselves because they just didn't have the means. At the end of the get-together, the head of the orphanage stood up and she said, thank you for coming. We really appreciate you, and you're such wonderful people and nice people and so forth. And we have a spread for you, Al. And here's all these sandwiches and cookies and cakes and stuff like that. And said, please help yourselves and enjoy the festivities. And as the kids started to go to the food, they noticed the orphans were standing against the wall. And they came to me and Brian and said, why aren't they eating? And so I asked our interpreter, and the lady said, well, they'll eat later after we leave. And the kids said, no, they're not. They're going to eat now. And they took the kids over and told them to eat the food. So, the other thing was, I forgot one thing. The only thing that we didn't have getting ready to go was Brian. Brian didn't want to go to Russia. He had no interest whatsoever. And finally, he was, I don't like the food. What do you mean you don't like the food? You've never been to Russia. How do you know you don't like the food? I don't like the food and I'm not going. Okay? We go fast forward to May 9th. Now, I don't know about your schedule, but my schedule said we had to get up around 6:30, breakfast around 8, 9 o'clock we had a concert at Gorky Park. From there we went back to the Olympic Village and relaxed, and then we had light concert rehearsal at Tchaikovsky Hall, and then from Tchaikovsky Hall we would go to dinner. So we had one of those sumptuous breakfasts you saw up there. I'm sitting there at breakfast thinking, how can Brian not like this? He's picky, you know? So we go to Gorky Park, and our host at Gorky Park was the ambassador of all music in Russia. And of course, this Gorky Park was for the elite. In Russia, this comrade thing where everybody's together and the fast lane that we have, that's for the rich in the Poblito in Russia. You remember, if you get hit by a car, if the person is dead and they hit him by the car, then they go to their family to pay for the car's expenses getting the car fixed, because the car has right of way over the person. True, this is true. So we have the, and he's a really nice guy. He's telling me about World War II and how he was a young boy and how the relief packages came and so forth. He even expressed that the Studebakers, these were old cars that they had, and his village was bombed out, or his city was bombed out 3 times. And they would sit in the curb and wait for the Studebakers because they knew food and substances was coming from the United States for them. And when we went to Palukha Gorga, that's the way it reads to me, the World War II Museum, the only thing you see at World War II museums is Russians beating the hell out of Germans. They're just tearing them up and so forth. Except there's a Studebaker with USA on it, right there as you walk in saying, anyhow, we know we were getting close to the end, and so you turned it up a notch. As you get to the end, if you're good musicians, you really get better. You sell it. And Palukha Gorga was the last field thing we were going to play. And so you let it rip. You played it so out. And when we're finished, the ambassador said, this is just an outstanding group of kids. What musicians and so forth. You have to be our guests on Red Square. And I think, well, we got time, okay. Who's performing? You are. That wasn't on the schedule. That wasn't in the contract. But we weren't going to pass that up, Frank on Red Square. So, and then we went to right away to Red Square, where Brian got an apple, a bag of potato chips, a sandwich, and some Kool-Aid. That was our lunch, and so forth. And we played on Red Square. Now, to our left was St. Basil's and a large military band there. You saw them alongside us when they were up there. And to our right was another temple, a big, white, beautiful temple with another military band, and across from us was Lennon's Tube and a Canet band. Well, we're out there cranking away and so forth. Meanwhile, Brian and I are thinking, oh God, we got to play a concert tonight, and it's a lot easier to play out than it is to play a concert. It's a lot physically stronger to play softer than it is to play loud and strong. But you're playing and you're doing it and so forth. And the crowd's around us, not around the Russian bands. And they're listening to us. And halfway through, I noticed from the right, here comes one of the directors from the Russian band. And he says, "You direct?" And of course I said, "Yes, I'm the director." He says, "You direct?" I said, "Yeah, I'm the director." And he looks at his band, he says, the other band, they march right alongside us, stop, turn, and so forth. And he says, "You direct." What do you do in a situation like that? What are you going to do? What are you going to play? What I always did, I called the band council together and the drum major. And here's the situation, I need a solution. Solution? Why don't we play the 6 numbers or 5 or 6 numbers that we're going to play at the concert tonight? We've got 6 Russian numbers. Let's play them. But the music's on the bus, and we don't have any music. Mr. Neal, we got it memorized. We can do it. And sure enough, you didn't know that. That was not planned. But that's how good our kids were, that they could do these things on the fly and so forth. And I remember the very last number playing, and I'm hearing Harold Diamond's lower brass section. The 2 numbers we had to play was, I believe, it Farewell Salome, is it? What she said. And Stars and Stripes Forever. Stars and Stripes, Sousa is a great, they think Sousa's like Tchaikovsky is to us, and so forth. So we had to play Stars and Stripes Forever at the end of our concerts. And when you hear us playing Farewell, the lower brass section is just belting it out and just jumping. And I'm looking at these Russian soldiers, and they got tears running down their eyes. These are hardened, tough. I mean, the general who you saw up there, who was the director of all the music in Moscow, was a paratrooper, a commando paratrooper. That's how he got to be the music director. And they heard our kids playing their music their way. So now, we don't have a chance to go back to the Olympic Village. We've got to go to Tchaikovsky Hall and get a quick, short rehearsal in there. Keep reminding them that, hey, remember this is a concert. We got to have the dynamics. We've got to play it, and so forth. And you played great. Usually at the end of the concert, people run to the front, especially in Europe, bringing flowers. They were bringing flowers to us halfway through the concert. We had them standing in the aisles. Brian and I, what are you going to play in Russia? Gershwin. Gershwin is known throughout the, and it just went great. And so now the general at that concert was our host And as we're leaving the stage, he comes up, he says, that was great, that was wonderful, that was outstanding. I said, thank you. He says, I want you to be our guest at the Royal Fireworks. Well, these kids haven't eaten, they haven't had dinner yet. I guarantee you we're going to have a great meal at the end of this thing, so forth, but we want you to be at the Royal Fireworks. And I said, well, who's performing? You are. In only 15 minutes, only 15, 20 minutes, you had that crowd. There's over 160,000 Russians. You look at that tape real close. You had them in the aisles. You had them going crazy from beginning to end. So it was unbelievable. We had a drum major who had to get ready for this performance in less than 3 months. Okay? And this young man learned the music. He wasn't a metronome. Watch him direct on that Royal Fireworks. He's pointing the sections and so forth. He's bringing the percussion section. Rick Wolfel. Here's another story. Rick was doing his thesis at the university for his doctorate. And he came to be our band percussion instructor. And we're sitting there saying, we've been invited to Russia. And Rick says, Russia? I said, yeah. He says, that's what I'm doing my thesis on. Do I get to go? And I said, no, the percussion section's loud enough, you can work with them when you go home. But no, I said, yeah, you're going. And he was just elated. TJ was the epitome of that thing of taking... Here was a young man that was not only playing in the concert, but he was directing the band. And when you direct the band, we're called a drum major. We're not called a field commander. Because a drum major directs. He is not a metronome. He directs. He's pointing things. He's doing for dynamics and so forth. And TJ worked so hard on that trip, at that concert, at the fireworks, that tuxedo almost started to fit him. Then, of course, when you listen to these tapes on good, when you can hear them on thing, listen to the Stars and Stripes Forever at the end of that concert. This concert's over an hour long, memorized, no music in front of them. Things, and I could call things that we hadn't played for a year. It was there. Now the freshmen, they didn't know what was going on, but the rest of us knew what was happening and so forth. And it was just outstanding. And finally, they took us to dinner, which was a 2-story McDonald's. We pulled into McDonald's, the lights went on like a Christmas tree, and they said it was just us. And I remember sitting there as clear as day, and I kept hearing them, Mashafa Wawata, Mashafa Wawata. And finally I said to the interpreter, what is Mashafa Wawata? He says, more Big Macs. More Big Macs, we're running out. So in closing, this country couldn't have picked a better organization to represent it. The parents that supported the kids and got them to go there, and the kids, not just on the field, but off the field. Not just with the horn in their hand, but just there as a people. So, I thank you for letting me go around for the ride. I was in the right place at the right time. But if you people keep doing what you're doing, keep being this good people and the kind people and the generous people you were in St. Petersburg and in Russia, the inquisitive types that when we went into rehearsals and worked, and you worked, and a team that you were the way you cared for each other and took care of each other, the way you took care of the freshman class every year that they came in. You keep doing that, and I guarantee you, you'll be in the right time, at the right place for many more years. Thank you.
All right, a couple of things, just wrapping up here. First of all, don't forget, 2 pictures, so don't sprint out of here, all right? Secondly, there was a story that got missed, which I know is kind of hard to believe at this point, but I think it's critically important to tell, okay? They talked about going to the orphanage, and on one of the Zoom calls when we were organizing tonight, this story got told. And it touched my heart in a way that makes it imperative for me to share with all of you. You saw the picture of, and I wrote it down, Calvin Hall. Okay? So you saw the picture of Calvin there, and Calvin was wearing a Michael Jordan jersey. And the students, the orphans, were like a magnet to him, right? And so they're telling the story on the Zoom call that these students just think that it's his airness himself, right, walking around this orphanage. And Calvin, you know, kind of not necessarily aware of what's going on, the magnitude of it. Well, Mr. Neal was. So Mr. Neal walks up to Calvin and says, if you give them your jersey, when you get back home, I'll get you a new one. The young man gave the boys the shirt off his back. For the last couple hours, I've been sitting here wondering why it was I didn't get to go to Russia. Mr. Neal talking about the pit band being one of the criteria for telling, you know, whether or not the group was well and good enough to go. I think it was my junior or senior year. I'm playing over there, and we're in rehearsal. And he mentioned that he wrote out the string part by hand for the saxophones to play the violin part. That was me. At one point during the rehearsal, it was as if I had never picked up the horn before in my life. You guys remember how I used to sit? Like this? Right? I'm playing in front of him because I'm first chair saxophone. Now suddenly can't play. The man reaches down, takes the horn out of my mouth, tilts it over and says, why don't you just take a break for a while? I also want to give a shout out to my guy TJ over here. TJ, don't worry, man. It took him 25 years to work up something that funny. The man is not that funny. There's a quote that I love. It's this. Next to love, the most sacred thing a person can give is their labor. You all labored together to produce something great. Mr. Neal labored for more than 40 years to create the platform for you to give your gift to others. I am so grateful to get to be here tonight. I'm so thankful that you represented us, the we, the yes,
so beautifully.
I would not be my mother's son if I did not say to all of the moms in the crowd, Happy Mother's Day. Two pictures before you leave, and one last time. We are! Army! We are! Army! We are! Army! Have a good night. God bless.
Picture. Right up to the stage. Yeah, who's up for picture? Tell me they want. Let me.
All right, let's have everybody up to the stage. Students and boosters. Everybody first. We're gonna do everybody first. All right, students and boosters to the main stage. Students and boosters to the main stage. We just talked for 4 hours about how disciplined you were and good you were at following directions. All right, y'all. Take a look at Brandon.
Jack, get over here. Landon, come here.
Take a look at Brandon.
Right there.
All right, here we go.
I'm gonna take a couple on the phone and on the camera. Just stay still, okay? All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Stay still. Now let's face the machine. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3, and then hang on. We're gonna do a little video of something after this place. All right, we're gonna do what Joe said tonight. When I go like this, we're gonna go we are or we. All right, ready? On my hands, okay?
We are.
Take two. 3 times. Three times. I do this. Ready?
We are. We are. We are.
Students only with Mr. Neal.
iPad right here, the iPad. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes.
Okay.
All right, guys, here we go. Take a look at Brandon.
Stay on the phone. One, now the balloons are good. So that's 1, 2, 3. Now this here. 1, 2, 3. Hailstorms. Hell yeah.
All right, guys, thank you so much. I think that's it for pictures. There's plenty of food. Make sure it gets out of here. The Fine Arts Center is staying open for a little bit longer, and there's the bar remains open. But you gotta get it yourself, and you gotta get yourself home.
They left like 10 o'clock, like I think it's like 5 and after 10.
We only had them till 10.
Yeah, and I was like, oh look, it's